that part. Okay. Go live is set. And there we go. Looks like we're live. So let's just make sure, just minimizing a couple of screens. And good morning, Bruce. Good to see you here this morning. How are you doing today? How's the audio sound? Always like to check that out. So just getting set up, and we've got 1 minute, but I think you'll get the idea of today's topic. Editing the same photo over and over again. It's something that happens sometimes, but this is going back to our earlier discussions here on channel. Let me just take a look real quick. Make sure that, yeah, okay, everything's looking good. So there we go. We got 3 folks on, just about 8 o'clock. So good morning, everybody. It's always fun getting all this stuff set up here. One thing I want to do, all right, Ray, thanks. That's what I wanted to hear. We've got good audio. All right, I think I got back to your recent comments, Ray, but if I've missed any, let me know. And good morning, Corey, good to see you. All good, that's excellent. So I guess let's start out the live stream. Welcome everybody. My name's Rich Charpentier. I'm the channel host. And more often than not, we're talking drones and photography, imaging, 360 imaging, and also building your own small drone business. So I'm taking people along with my own journey. And this has been fun. I've been enjoying doing the live streams. I've been enjoying the fact that we've got some regular folks popping in here. And I'm glad the content has some value to you guys. So we're not going to sit around too long this morning. We're going to start talking about something that came up in a recent live stream, or it might have been on one of our Zoom meetings for patrons. And I was talking about doing raw land sites from our drones for clients. So we talked about some of the challenges where sometimes realtors would like us to draw on property lines and things like that. Also flying the properties so that we can get the best views and things, and that's fantastic. But something I wanted to get more into was actually the color quality and what we're presenting to our clients. And the image that you see on my screen is probably not the same image that I see on my screen. Right now I'm using a BenQ monitor with a Mac Mini M1. Turns out after I bought the BenQ, I found out that their software wasn't up to date yet with the Mac M1 Mini. So I can't do the exact color calibration that I do over to my right here. I have an iMac. That iMac, I've actually, every couple of weeks, so we're not selling a product here, but the i1 color checker, this is from X-Rite. Now I've been using X-Rite's tools for years. One of my big things was print quality years ago when I was actually doing print reproductions for people. I wanted to get as close as possible on the color quality between the prints that were coming out of a large Canon and making sure that things matched up with originals. So I was using the color checker, what was it? It was the Monkey, X-Rite's color checker Monkey, I think it was. And since then, that's out the window and a new version's come out. So I purchased maybe a year and a half ago, the i1 color checker, because I was getting neurotic about color again. And so that works very well with my iMac, and things are really dialed in. And when I do edits on the iMac, and then I display them on, let's say, my iPhone or my iPad, very consistent color quality. So everything looks right. And there's another question, something we'll be talking about today. So I jokingly put on here on the title, which image is correct? And honestly, any image is correct depending on what you're trying to relay. So we'll get into that, but let me go down here. So last week I was looking around and I found a nice quick explanation from one place. So quality logo products, so people who are doing their logos with this particular company are worried about color. So why do colors look different on computer monitors and screens? Like I said, my BenQ is not calibrated yet. So BenQ doesn't have the software for the M1, the Mac Mini M1. And X-Rite with my i1 color checker photo kit They don't have the software ready either. There's some issues with it. So I've still been waiting since I purchased these things. Painful. So why do these colors look different? So, there's a couple of differences, but I wanted to pull this image up because clearly this is a site for someone who wants to put your logo on coffee mugs or other things. And so in their interest, the Quality Logo Products Company is saying, hey, might look a little different than what's on your display. So if you use two monitors at work, you may have noticed, and when I'm working on my iMac, I have a Samsung with a slight curve on it. I actually bought that more for playing a video game than I did for editing. And I will tell you that that Samsung is extremely dark in comparison to the iMac. And there's not much I can do with it. There's not a lot of menus or features or settings. It's not a monitor that I'm going to be calibrating. So there is a monitor that I'm not going to be editing on ever, because if I get it somewhere satisfactory to me on screen, and as I said, that's a very dark screen, I'm probably going to be bumping the exposure. I'm probably going to be bumping the shadows, bringing all of that up. And then when I put it on a color accurate screen, it's going to look overexposed. So that becomes problematic. And so when working with realtors for raw land sites, raw land is a little harder to pin down. If you're flying around a house or you're shooting interiors of homes, you have a very good idea of what the color quality is supposed to be. You were in that building, you were shooting that building, and you can dial things in a little more. When we're looking at raw land, we don't have the greatest frame of reference. And I've seen a lot of images from raw land sites here in Arizona where people have massively pumped up the saturation, massively pumped up the vibrance. And it's because some of these landscapes are pretty darn flat. If you're not in Sedona, or you're not at the Grand Canyon, or up at the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument, when you look out at some of these other raw land sites, it is a sea of tan and flattened out greens that tend toward the yellow side. So not those deep greens that we're used to back on the East Coast. Out here, it's some pretty darned flattened images. So when I started looking around, when we started doing more raw land sites for clients, I was trying to get a feel for, the differences in what other photographers and drone pilots were doing for their clients. So I've been on this quest because I want to get it right. And as I said, there's no right. And we're going to look at a couple examples of that. But, it's all dependent on what your client wants. But you have to keep in mind, and I've heard this before in the gallery business, I've had people who used to come into my studio and they said, I was looking at some of your images online and they looked a little too dark to me. And, I really wanted something from a ghost town like that, but it looked a little dark and foreboding on your website. But now that I'm here in the studio and you've got the lighting and everything, wow, that thing really pops. I'm going to buy it. So there, my website was actually hurting me because these folks were looking on a monitor. Who knows if they pumped the contrast all the way up, if they pumped the brightness all the way up. We don't know, and we don't have control over that. So with that in mind, we got to try to find some kind of middle ground for ourselves. Now, as I said, the BenQ I've been doing editing on now, even though it's a little off from the iMac, it's just a little darker than the iMac screen. So I know that if I'm editing in here and it's actually going a little darker on this screen, if I bump things up a little to make it really palatable for me on the BenQ, most likely it's going to look a little more, it's going to look a little over brightened on the iMac or the iPhone or the iPad from my own personal experience. And so I remind myself of that while I'm doing edits with this particular monitor. It's very, very close with the BenQ setup already, but I still want to be able to use that color checker. So, all right, let's go ahead and minimize this one. But so this should give you an idea. I mean, these are two very, it does make a difference in that mug. So on the left, it may look teal blue. On the right, it's close to sea green. And now you've got my screen coming through on your screen. So who knows how much more, how much worse the color is. I'm going to minimize that one, and then there's our title screen for the day. By the way, feel free to chime in anytime, guys. So I'm keeping my eye over. I decided to move the chat bar over to the left-hand side since I'm hovering down on that side. So I was hoping it will keep me from blocking things. So one thing I wanted to do, and this isn't raw land right now, we're just looking at some edits for a home that we did the other year. Just wanted a good example for you here. So this is my 2019 catalog. As I've said on here before, when I do my Lightroom catalogs, I do year by year catalogs so that I can keep track of all of them. So I've got catalogs going back to 2008. But I thought that this would be a good one. And right in here, so this is looking just a little darker than when I'm looking on my iMac. But I wanted to give you this one. This is a test twilight shot for a series we did for a client. We used our old rental house for some of that testing, and we're looking at the final product here. So this might be a little brighter on your screen than mine or a little darker. I don't know because I'm not looking over your shoulder. So this is something to keep in your mind when you're presenting stuff to your clients. You know, how does it come across on other screens? I've got another little LG over to the left here, which is also terrible for editing. So why do I have these second monitors sometimes other than for a game? It's to push stuff off onto the other screen so that I'm working on my main screen. So normally I do like working off of two screens, and I just have to remind myself which screen is the color accurate one. Now, on this particular image here that we're looking at, this is done in Lightroom, but then some additional editing was done outside in Photoshop just to get my final tweaks. So this was the final product, and on the BenQ, it's looking a little dark to me. Oh, take a look at all the steps in here. So in the develop module of Lightroom, I've got my history of all the stuff and all the testing that I've done on this. I'm going to go ahead and close up that history. And let's just say that it's looking a little dark on your monitors too. Let's bump the exposure. Let's go 0.5. And now this is looking really good to me on my screen. I know that if I were to take this image, put it on the iMac, that it's going to be maybe even a little brighter than I want it to be. But so this image right in here came from an original DNG, no HDR, no nothing, and we're going to see that one momentarily. So this is something that I would find more presentable, but I am going to put that back to 0 for now just to have it there. And let's go ahead and hit the G key for the grid view. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at the 3. So our starting point is on the bottom here. So this was the original DNG and pretty flat. It was getting close to sunset. You know, the skies weren't popping. We didn't have clouds, so we didn't have a lot of contrast in the sky. But you see on the final image, we actually do have some warmer things going on off in the distance, and that was from just dropping the highlights. But so this original one right here, this is what came out of camera. And definitely, this is not something you're going to hand over to a realtor and say, it's a twilight shot. It's not. This is fairly muted and not looking so good. What we did before ever going into Photoshop was I actually did some fine tuning between the original DNG and this one. So let's go ahead and put those side by side really quick so that we can take a look at the difference. I'm going to hit the tab key here just to open it up. So the image on the left, copy 1, is actually derived from the original DNG, and I just made some extra virtual copies for toying around and also for another course that I did not too long ago. So as you can see, just minor edits with Lightroom. Number one, we got this flat white sky out here. No, we don't. Now we've got a little bit of blues in there and some warmth as the sun is in fact going down. And you can also see where the sun is hitting here, even in the original. So we got a little bit of sun coming in. It's still hitting that treetop. So there's one of my indicators that yes, in fact, this is going to be a little underexposed. We're right at the edge of twilight. And we've got the drone up there, and I wasn't even bracketing. Well, I did bracket, but I didn't use the brackets for these. So I'm just going to hit the G key again here, and let's go ahead and look at the original real quick, and then we're going to get into the raw land stuff. Also, Joe, if you're on channel, let me know. I do have the answer to your question that you asked over the weekend about affinity and your 360 images. All right, so here we go. We've got the original, and I did this either in one of my courses or I did this in another live stream. So any of you who've seen this, sorry if it's a little redundant. But so here's that original DNG basically. I'm going to drop the highlights. And now we've got a little something out in the distance there for ourselves. I'm going to push up the shadows just a little bit, not too much. And actually, I'm going to put that down to 40. And what we can do here, so one of the steps that I took previously, I need to warm this area up and also bring up that, that exposure there. So let me see here. I'm going to take the shadows down, but let's bring the exposure up just a little bit. And I'm using the paintbrush here. So I'm doing this very quickly, and normally I would take a little more time on this, but I just wanted to show you how we can open this up really quickly, really easily. I'm even bringing this up. And the other thing I want to do is let's warm this up to give that twilight feel. All right, and maybe I went a little too far on that front area and I'll have to bring that down. Let's bring this brush down just a bit because we wanted to brighten that front area too. So this is a sizable change from what we had as the original. I'm going to turn that brush off just for a moment and let's go take a look at our before and after. And it is doing the wrong one. So I selected the wrong thing here. Let's double check this copy 2. There's Twilight DNG. All right, there's copy 1. And there's copy 2. So copy 2 is the one that we were working on. My apologies for losing track for a sec. But now we can definitely see, let's go back into the develop module really quickly. And let's just look at the minor edit that we just did. And why is it showing me copy 2 again? All right, it's insisting on that copy 2. Gee, let's get out of there and go to copy number 2. And there's copy number 1. Let's take a look at copy number 1 in the develop module. And let's go ahead and see if that's gonna... No, it's still being weird and it's wanting copy 1 and copy 2. My apologies for that. You are, however, getting the idea of this for doing our painting in, I'm sure. Let me double check to make sure I'm not missing anybody else new on channel here. So, all right, we still have everybody on. Excellent. So the whole idea in talking about this one is when you're thinking about even raw land sites, you have some problems that could crop up for you, and how you're doing the edits is going to impact that final version. And the person that you're trying to make happiest is, of course, the realtor or the builder to get their vision of things. So one of the other things that I've heard in recent weeks, and I mentioned this on another stream, I've had several realtors now say to me, hey, you're the professional, it's all up to you. I still want to get that feedback from the realtor. And also, if possible, if you get a sit down with the realtor, you can actually take a look at what they're viewing with and keep that in mind when you're doing final edits for them. I'm just going to scroll up on this one because so this is from way back in 2019, but I just wanted to take a look at some other things. We had talked about faking skies and things before. This is not a faked sky. So this is just a flight over Point of Rocks RV Campground in Prescott's Granite Dells. I believe that this one is actually right out of the camera, so let's go double check. And yeah, so there's no other edits going on here. The colors are what the Mavic 2 Pro gave me. And let's just arrow over one really quick. Yep, so number 28, just making sure no brackets or anything. And so this was closer. This is getting into the summer season and things are a little greener here because they had a little more water for that spring and winter actually. But the reality of the location is a lot of tans. Now, when I've been doing my research on other raw land drone pilots, I have seen things extremely oversaturated, or I've seen things that are super, super flat that probably just didn't get edited at all. They just got shot on the ground and presented as is. Now, I think there can be more of a middle point for all of us. And, you know, it's going to be our own tastes and preferences, of course. And so what I'm going to do now, whoops, I closed that arrow button, is we're going to go over and open another recent one. So the 2121 Mini, and this has got some of our newest stuff. So, by the way, on this particular image out in the Granite Dells, I would find this satisfactory enough just to show an aerial view. Let's say this was a property for sale. And this is a pretty honest representation. This is 3:41 p.m., so afternoon. So the sun is over to the west, so it's actually off to the right side of this image. And we can also see where the shadows are kicking off here. But this would be something that I would call passable for a raw land site. Now, some of the new stuff, I normally do a level adjustment Photoshop before doing any major tweaks. Yep, that is one way to go at it. And you can also do that in Lightroom too. So you do have your tone curve. So you don't have levels, but you do have your tone curve. And what we're looking at right now is something very blown out. But we're going to take a look at one series. So last week, what I did, I actually went out to Watson Lake Park. I brought the M50 with me. I brought the recording setup with me, and I went out to do some videos about this. And what happened in the end is I made the decision, let's just do this as the live stream instead. Because I had a lot of background noise going on over at Watson Lake Park on Friday. So while I was trying to do the recording, there was actually a couple of folks out with the new DJI FPV drones. I saw them down in the grassy field, so I made sure to move myself further away. I was not flying the drone for the day. I was just doing ground-based stuff because I wanted to talk about these issues and issues of color quality. And you know, like Ray, when you do the level adjustments or when you do any initial minor tweaks in Lightroom, we can get ourselves a really long way very quickly toward the image that we want. So when I went out, I was using the Canon M50 on a Manfrotto tripod on Friday, recording myself and then shooting with the M50. The M50 is not usually my landscape camera. The M50, quite honestly, is mostly my videos camera. But I decided to bring it along to have a small kit with me for the day, just experimenting with, you know, the lightest equipment possible. So these aren't the greatest setups. What I had in mind here was actually this live stream and that video series I was talking about. And actually, let's start up with this one just because it's an interesting area. Now, for me on this screen, everything's looking slightly underexposed, not terribly, but let's go ahead. And we just pulled up the develop module here in Lightroom. And looking up at the histogram, you know, we've kind of got that bell curve going on. You see the blues further out here. But maybe we want to punch this one up a little bit. So we've got a couple of ways to do this. And this is the other part of today's video. I wanted to talk about several different ways to edit things to get a little more punch and, you know, while not going overboard and not being unrealistic. So, you know, number one, we can just edit this DNG. Like I said, I made a bracketed series. So these three images are part of that bracketed series, so we can obviously do an HDR here. We can do the Lightroom version of an HDR, and I will say, Lightroom is very, it's not as heavy-handed when doing small HDRs. So I do like that a lot about Lightroom if we're trying to do something subtle. Now, where the sun was, the sun's actually behind me in this one, and so we do have a lot of shadows in the rocks, and that becomes more noticeable. Actually, now I remember why I wanted to show you this one. Let's go ahead into the develop module, and let's see our history. Okay, so this is the original model brought in. Let's play with this one for a few minutes first. Looking dark to me, probably looking dark even on my other monitors. And so what can we do about that? Number one, I'm going to drop the highlights because I want a little more depth in the sky, so that really did a little for those clouds there. Now I want to pull up the shadows. Now, what I just said to you was the sun was over there. This area right here should be in the shadows. There's a lot of shadow being cast on top of this, but even with that said, we can still bring those shadows up a little more, and that does make a difference because now I can get some of the detail in here. I'm gonna say the colors in here are pretty realistic. The Granite Dells changes throughout the day. It's crazy. So if you're on an overcast day, sometimes a lot of these rocks look pretty flat and gray. Then they'll have a little bit of tan going on in them. Sunrise and sunsets, They can turn extremely tan. They can actually end up being pink depending on clouds and things. So the reality of the day is there's a lot of options for what this should look like. So what's the correct photo? It's all about time of day. There's no correct photo. There's the best representation that you can give doing landscape work, and it's really going to massively depend on your time of day. Most of my favorite images that I've shot over the years without the drone were usually dawn and dusk. Those are the big times. I've gone into gorgeous areas like White Pocket up in the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument and gotten in there midday just because of drive times and things. And it's an incredibly gorgeous and stunning area, and it looked like garbage at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So when the sun is just blasting down and you don't have any clouds to cast anything additional, it looked terrible. It was just awful. But when we got up for sunrise and when we were shooting at sunset, totally different. The rock formations were lit up in different ways. So when we're thinking about these raw land photos in some open desert areas here, you do have a little bit of room, but still you don't want to go all unrealistic. So we just played with that for a moment. By the way, just wanted to show you guys, the kayakers were out in force on Friday. So 2 kayaks here, 2 kayaks over here, another kayaks right over here. And we also had a group that was crossing over here. There was like 5 or 6. Watson Lake is a great place to paddle. All right, I'm gonna hit reset on this image. So there we go. When I hit the reset, the clouds kind of lost some of that extra edgy detail. Look at the shadowing in here once again. And if I just pop up those shadows really quick, I feel okay with that. That's not terrible. It's not great. You know, it's not magazine quality. We're not selling this to anybody. But in a few short seconds, we can do a lot with it. Now, let's take a look at this one again. We're just going to take all 3, and I'm going to go ahead and do a photo merge to HDR. So let's go ahead and use Lightroom's HDR version. I'm going to tell it to merge. Excuse the squeakiness of my chair. So I was just noticing that one. All right, so there we go. 4 images. So the first image is the HDR DNG brought to you by Lightroom. So no other tweaking, just using that. And let's move over. So here's that original flat file. So this got punched up just a little bit. Let's take a look in the develop module to see what happened. What did it do with that HDR? So if we look over on the right-hand side over here, we're looking at it bumped the exposure almost imperceptibly. Highlights, dropped the highlights way down, so we did get some of that detail in the sky. And shadows, it pushed those shadows up, plus 67. That's where we're getting that detail in the rock now. And let's take a look, push the whites up just a little bit and drop the blacks down just a little bit to really define those darker areas. So this one is definitely, whoops, let's arrow that back. Let me hit the G key here and let's just select between these 2 once again. So definitely the one on the left-hand side has a little more brightness going on. As a matter of fact, time of day, and as I recall it, I think Lightroom pushed up the saturation or the vibrance just a little too much. The one on the right-hand side is actually a more honest depiction. But still, overall, if I were to be handing one of these off to the realtors or to the builders, it's probably going to be that little HDR DNG that we see here, okay? And so does that mean it's the correct photo? It doesn't mean that it's the correct photo. It's a more pleasing photo to my eye. So the next big question is, how do your clients take it? So when I'm done with these things, I do export them out. I pop them over onto the iMac again, and I take a look because I know the iMac is well calibrated. So I'm going to hit the G key again, and what we're going to do now is we're going to try another item. So I've been doing HDR for years, and I've really mellowed out on it. I had a lot of fun with extreme stuff back in 2007, 2008, 2009. I went crazy with some of this stuff, over the top even. I still have a lot of my higher end HDR tools. We do have Aurora HDR, which we'll try after, but I did find over the weekend that it was crashing constantly. So what I've done is I've selected the original brackets, the original DNGs, and down in my export, I do have an option to export to Photomatix Pro. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to export those 3 images to Photomatix Pro. So we're going to make an HDR with Photomatix. And looking at some of the other drone raw land sites that I've been looking at over the past couple weeks, I have actually figured out what a couple of them are using at least, because there are some presets in Photomatix and Aurora and other HDR applications out there. And so here we go. Whoa, this is a little poppier. This feels almost candy coated compared to what we were looking at. Everything's definitely come up. So exposure is definitely up a little. And over on the right-hand side of Photomatix Pro, we do have a bunch of default settings, and we can also create our own presets as well, which I haven't done on the M1 yet. And so I don't have any of those at the ready for you. So we can use some of theirs as starting points to take a look. But definitely, number one, seeing this preview, much brighter, much poppier. It still, does it represent the Granite Dells? Absolutely. Does it represent my time at the Granite Dells while I was doing these shots for this live stream? No, it doesn't. I've never seen it kind of this bumped up. So is this something that you could still share? Yes. Is this something that might appeal to folks? Yes. Let's go over on the right-hand side. Let's go to detailed really quick. Detailed, and by the way, this isn't a class on Photomatix Pro, but there are a lot of HDR settings that you can do over on the left-hand side. We've got some of the tools for strength, tone, compression, detail, contrast. This is something that you'd have to look through on your own to start doing your own presets. I can tell you this preset, this feels, I don't know why, but it's in my head. This feels like cotton candy. Definitely pumped up saturation a little too much for me. Even though over here on the left-hand side, saturation's at 0, temperature's at 0, brightness is at 0. So wow, it could be even more saturated. And that's on their detailed version. Let's go to balanced. So now this is a darker feel to this one, and you can tweak this and then save your presets as well. This one feels it feels closer to the scene. I still feel like we've bumped up the color just a bit much in here, but not too much. Now, the next one is what they call realistic. This is what we came in on. So this is pretty super poppy. Not terrible for people who've never seen the Dells. This might be enough to give them an idea and go, wow, I like that, and that's pretty. But once again, we've really nuked the shadows in here, and the shadows were much deeper in comparison to where the sunlight is. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go with the realistic because it feels very similar to some of the other drone raw lands that I've seen recently. So once I've told it the next step, I'm going to tell it to save and re-import, and then we're going to see, boy, are we going to see a difference. So here is our Photomatix, and I always set it to relabel things with the 3 brackets that we've done. Hey, Supersonic, good to see you on channel this morning. How you doing? Sorry, I haven't been looking over at that too much over at the chat bar. I got to pay attention to that. All right, so looking at this one now, this is the combination of those 3 images and the 3 DNGs, and wow, it's a heck of a lot brighter. Let's go into the develop module here. So look at our histogram over here. We've definitely, gone to the brighter side of things. So if I were to throw this up on my iMac, it's going to look even brighter to me than it does right now. So is it going to work for me? Potentially, but from my own tastes and preferences, this would not be the one that I'm sharing with the client. Let's look over at the HDR that was just made with Lightroom. Huge difference here. So I'm just going to select these 2. And a lot of times, so the other thing is we're not going into heavy edits here. We're talking about raw land sites. When I'm doing my regular editing for building exteriors or for fun landscapes, whatever it is, then I'm fine-tuning to my own tastes and preferences, and things are going to be a little different. Now when we're looking at these 2, I'm looking over on the left-hand side, and the Lightroom HDR DNG there is looking a little underexposed. Once again, I'm also reminding myself, you're on a darker monitor, Rich. We definitely preserved a lot more of those shadows, so we still have some detail in the shadows, but this is a much more honest representation of where the sun was. But if you were to ask somebody who's looking around at raw land sites, a place to build or something, I'm going to go ahead and bet you they're going to err on the side of the over bright version. All right, so let's try one more thing. I'm selecting those three one more time, and we're gonna see if we're gonna upset Aurora today. So I'm gonna open the source files, or if Aurora is gonna work for us today. It's just been random on the M1, and I do not use it too often. And I can already tell you that it's already showing me that it's not a happy camper. So by now it should have popped those three images in here. So what I'm gonna do is cancel that, and we're going to go ahead, and it's still stuck there. I'm gonna go down to the bottom of my screen. We're gonna try this again. So I've launched Aurora, and now let's try it again from Lightroom one more time. And let's see. So everyone's still catching up with the M1 chips, by the way. So Aurora, let's open the source files. Let's try this again and see what it does for us. There we go. So there's the three source files. We've gotten further than some of my other experiments. There are several other tools in here for reducing ghosting if the tree is blowing back and forth. On a raw land site, if we're shooting pretty high up, we're really not going to notice ghosting. Also, we could reduce chromatic aberrations. Right now, I'm not going to do that because I'm just hoping that this isn't going to crash on us. My testing yesterday was crash after crash. 2 days ago, no crashes. Okay, so we're not going to be showing you with Aurora. So let's go ahead and say okay to that. Now, on the M1, we've been looking at a really pretty place. I want to scroll back up here to my recent shots for one raw land site. And so I tried to replicate a couple of styles. And so this is number one here. Let's double check this. Yep, all right. So this is number one. This is a DNG file. So this came out of the Mavic 2 Pro. And I did do some development work on this. So let me hit the tab key here really quick. Oh, and by the way, let's close Aurora. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it's working and not working. Sometimes I really do not have a good explanation for that. All right, I'm going to hit the D key in here for the develop module. So I did some tweaking by hand. So this was just as one example for you. So you'll notice I dropped highlights all the way down because I just wanted something more happening in the sky. Punched shadows all the way up because I wanted to get into some of these nooks and crannies. And let's arrow over from that one. Here's the original. Here's one of the original DNGs. Okay, so this is probably the underexposure, and there's the overexposure. So we've got those three. Let's hit the G key again and see where I'm at here. There we are. So let's go into the develop module real quick, and let's reset this. And there we go. So I just wanted you to see. So just standard development in Lightroom really bumped things up nicely. So let's go back. There we go. So we're all the way back. And I even bumped vibrance and saturation. I was trying to replicate an image from a similar location that's also a different piece of property for sale. So I was looking around just to see what other people are doing. So we were seeing some definite bumps in saturation. Now let's take a look at the second one. So this was done with Photomatix, and I used one of the preset Photomatix settings as well. So definitely a sizable difference between the two. Let's go ahead and select those two. And so now we have the DNG that I edited by hand, and then we have the DNG that was done in Photomatix. Once again, you can fine tune this to your taste and preferences. What I'm doing with today's live stream is showing you we can develop a bunch of different versions of the same image, all that look nice and appealing, you know, if we take them away from the other versions. But when you start looking at all three, now you're sitting there asking yourself, should it be cooler color temperature? Should it be warmer color temperature? And what's it going to look like on all these others? Looks nice. Thank you very much, Supersonic. And so just checking over there again. Now, let me hit the G key one more time because we're going to pick one more. So this was from Aurora HDR, and I used one of their natural settings on that. And so there are two things going on with that one. So number one, Aurora took all those images. I told them to auto-align. I want you to watch the horizon here. So do you see the curvature in the horizon here? Let's arrow back to the Photomatix one no curvature. So Aurora also introduced some bowing there, so I'd have to do a little more straightening in this one as well. But when it's all said and done, here we go. So we've got our DNG that we edited, we've got the Aurora, and we've got the Photomatix. Which one is right? So, and this is a totally loaded question. All three of them standalone could probably be impressive enough for your raw land client. What I've seen in my area, the tendency is to go more toward this DNG right here. So just a little bumping of the saturation, bringing up the shadows a little bit, dropping the highlights a little bit. And also the one on the bottom, which is the Aurora version, I've seen a little bit more of that. So this one also, you know, this one feels cooler, so you could definitely warm it a little bit. And, you know, most days, if you were to do like an auto white balance or something, it's almost always sunny days here. I know we had a lot of snow this winter, but it's almost always sunny days here. So in the end, when we're looking at, you know, if you start getting raw land sites, it's kind of tough. You know, people sit around and say to themselves, what do you mean it's kind of tough, Rich? It's raw land. How can you do it wrong? You definitely can make it oversaturated. You definitely can get the white balance in the wrong place. Maybe even overdo it on the details of these, you know, the clouds in here. So this one's an edit, so I know that I threw that one out manually to do a little more with, but I didn't even do an HDR with this. One of the things I just wanted to show on this particular one, knowing the landscapes, living here for over a decade now, this particular area is not this colorful. So this is more of a drab tan, but we've got some oranges and reds blended into here as well. So we've gone a little overly poppy as far as the reality of the location. So in the end, it's going to be up to you how you want to portray your raw land sites, but I did want to go through just to talk about, you know, how these edits impact us. So let's take a look at another one that I flagged for myself. And so this was an HDR DNG. Like I said, I seem to be leaning more toward light HDRs and minor tweaking with Lightroom than going to an Aurora or a Photomatix or something else. One other thing I wanted to share with you in here. So as I said, I was playing around with the M50. I was having a little bit of fun. And because I haven't used the M50 for much in the way of still photography, it's always been about the edits. And I'm trying to find what it is I wanted to show you because I got a kick out of this. So just doing a couple of minor edits. Maybe this one's going to do it. Okay, 1 of 3. I think this is going to be the one. Let's just go in and edit this with Lightroom. And the M50 did a nice job for me, so I'm impressed with that little camera. Once again, we're going to bring the shadows up here. And maybe we'll bring those highlights down a little bit more. I'm just experimenting as we're going along together. There was something I wanted to show you, and I don't know. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I am bumping up the exposure a little bit more. No, this is not what I would go with. But just for the sake of fun, while I was down there, so we're into spring, and taking my shots, and I just, as I was playing around with these before, so once again, not a sellable or presentable image. That's not why we're after this one. I just wanted to show you, if you're looking on a bigger monitor, do you see all these little no-see-em bugs in here? So they didn't exist before I bumped up the shadows. They were everywhere. So they were in my hat, in my hair, all up in my face. So I moved to the upper area of Watson Lake Park to get away from these little bugs. So throughout this scene, you will see the swarm over here. They all stick to the shadows. So when we bump those shadows up, and let's pull the blacks up. Just so the whole reason why I'm doing this is just to show you all the little bugs that were out that day while I was doing these shots for this video. So at least it wasn't mosquitoes. So there we go. All right, and bumping this one up, by the way, it does look better than the original. So let's, you know, if I hadn't bracketed and I just took the recommendations from the camera, even in aperture priority, so I was shooting in aperture priority, We still had a lot of shadows, and I've said on here before, I would rather overexpose by a little than underexpose by a little, because if you're trying to bring things back from the underexposure, that's when you start introducing a lot more noise. But yeah, so the one on the right is actually looking a little more appealing to me. Once again, is this photo correct? Your tastes, your preferences. And in the end, though, we do have clients that we're all catering to. So I think it's worth a review with the realtors or construction folks that you're working with. Give them a couple of options, and you can always set up your own presets in Photomatix, in Aurora, in Lightroom. We can create all of our own presets for these custom tastes and preferences that our clients have. So as I've said in many of my other classes over on Teachable or Udemy, you have to have some conversations with your clients. If they're sending you out to shoot sight unseen, you've never worked with them before, maybe you need to take a look through their portfolio as a realtor to see if they go on the side of really poppy colors and extra bright, or if they're a little more muted and a little more realistic. Your preferences have matched mine. Yeah, Bruce, I really, you saw the bugs easy. um, I enjoyed doing some over-the-top HDRs in years gone by. And they can be a lot of fun. And let's see if it's in this collection. No, it's not in this collection. Let's go back, open recent. Let's go back over to 2019 real quick to see if I tuck them in there. I like mild bumps for outdoors. For indoors, whatever it takes to get the interiors, off-camera flash, bracketing, whatever it is we need. I want to do that. Okay, so I only flagged these, sorry. Oh, and by the way, we can actually go back to that grid view real quick. But I like keeping it more simple now. So it was really fun in galleries for these off-the-wall presentations with scary ghost towns and things. And now when dealing with realtors and dealing with construction professionals, they do want to see things pop a little bit. But I think that we need to be really representative of the properties we're working on. So as you can see, my truck's in this one. This was just me scouting out a location the other year for a client. So it was this flight area. And as I've always said, I like to show up places, boots on the ground, because in Google Earth and Google Maps, you might not see these really low-hanging power lines that really made me do a lot of extra work to get the shots I needed. A better question, should the image look good or should the image look realistic? Bruce, that's been the struggle. And so everybody else on here, it is the struggle, and this particular one, DNG, so this is pretty close. And that's the thing, that's the challenge that's been bothering me in my business right now. Seeing all those poppy colors, I've gone out to these places. I know the colors. I'm, spot on with what the landscape looks like here. We've got a lot of tan and a lot of washed out tan that sometimes almost goes to the gray side. So I'm just scrolling down for some of these other ones as we were getting ready for some of the twilight shots that we were doing here. As you can see, the flagged one. So, doing a little bit of extra work on that one. And the client was also after, pre-twilight. We didn't have any good clouds in the sky. Of course, now I can fake a cloud super easy. And while I don't mind that, I think, over-reliance on that might not be the best. What happened to this one? Oh yeah, this was one of the ones that I wasn't happy with because of the tree in there. But, I'll actually go out scouting, get the lay of the land, get some, better ideas. So here's one of the HDR DNGs. And then we also did a little crop here because they did want some 1920 by 1080. And oh yeah, so here you go. This is an interesting one to take a look at. So this one was also done with a very, very light touch. Let's go look at the images that went into it. So here we go. We had our exposing into the sun, not always a fun thing. So I was doing some manual work in this one, and all in all, in the end, so definitely punched it up a lot. Let's go back to the original really quick, 1 out of 5. And let's just take a look. Is this salvageable? As I said before, I rather would start from an overexposed area, but let's just bringing those shadows up was very helpful. I always like to bump the clarity. It's just kind of a curiosity thing with me before I do much else. Bring the highlight down to really get the sun in there. And then one of the other things I'd probably do with this afterward is come in with a paintbrush. And, you know, most likely, realistically, if you're doing some higher end homes for sale, you're probably going to be doing a little more Photoshop work or affinity work as well. We always want to get things as good as we can in camera at first. And let's just take a look. Let's go over to the overexposure here and hit that develop module again. Let's just drop the highlights all the way down, but bring those shadows up, but we don't have to as much. So very quickly we can go through and start painting these things in. Now, before we go today, let me just go ahead and minimize this one. I hope this wasn't too long for all of you guys. You know I go a little long here, so sorry about that. I'm gonna pull this one up. And I did want to tell you, let's bring a browser up on screen actually. So as I've been thinking about color quality and presentations to realtors and what looks good to anybody viewing these, you know, especially the raw land side of things, I keep coming back to a book that I read many, many years ago. It's a book written by Scott Kelby, who runs Kelby One, and I took a lot of classes from them back in the 2000s. So a lot of my Photoshop work and things is thanks to what I first learned on Kelby's training site. He had a book called the 7-Point System, Scott Kelby. And if you haven't seen this book, I don't think this book is actually available in many places more. I do have it on my Kindle, so I've downloaded it for Kindle. And this book was way back for Photoshop CS3. I'm just going to click on Amazon and see. Lightroom 7-Point System. Okay, so they've done something new, the Lightroom 7-Point System as well. This book was all about Camera Raw and what you can do when you're first working with your images. So he actually, he's got 7 points to the system. I'm not going to give them away. But wow, so buy new, buy used, it's kind of hard to come by. But now we've got the Lightroom 7-Point System. What was in the original 7-Point System for Photoshop carries right over to Lightroom because the raw editor is pretty much the same. But if you want a really great book, and it's always in my head when I'm doing some of these edits and when I'm thinking about what I like and my tastes and preferences, this book, so once again, I don't get any referrals or anything. I think it's out of print. I know that I've got it on my Kindle, but now they've got the 7-Point System for Lightroom, and it's probably going to go through the same exact types of steps that Kelby went through with the Photoshop one. I was incredibly impressed. He had some severely underexposed scenes for a couple of things that he was doing sunsets on. And when you walk through the steps with him in that book, it's absolutely incredible how powerful Camera Raw is. I don't think, you know, I think a lot of portrait photographers and wedding photographers really do understand how powerful RAW is, but I think people who are just getting into this don't realize always be shooting in RAW if you can. So when am I not shooting in RAW? When is it JPEG on the drone? When I'm building models. So when I'm shooting for 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional models, everything's on auto because it's not about the pretty picture, it's about the information. So, you know, we need to show off changes in a property or something. Yeah, that's, you know, that's when I'm doing JPEGs and stuff. When I'm out shooting landscapes for my fun and pleasure and enjoyment, or for realtors or construction folks, you're most likely going to find me in Camera Raw, and you're also most likely going to find me in aperture priority or full manual. Aperture priority is usually when I'm doing my fun landscapes. But yeah, so if you can stumble across or find the original 7-Point System or the 7-Point System for Lightroom, let me see, paperback $39.95. So it's probably going to be the same type of stuff that was in the original 7-Point System. So, and thanks on that one, Bruce. Yeah, it was fun making that particular sunset for them. we had a good time, and the realtor was really happy. So as you're working on your business and doing your raw land sites or home sites, I would keep in mind that you should have a conversation with the realtor, builder, whoever it is. Find out their tastes and preferences. Take a look at their portfolio of what they've been selling, and which direction they're leaning in for the types of photos they have. We had a person last year, yeah, it was last year, who felt that a couple of the images we submitted were underexposed, and the issue wasn't that it was underexposed. We had it over on the iMac. We were, looking at the histograms and everything. It was the monitor that he was viewing on, and it was an older, not so nice laptop. So we won't pick on it or anything. But so absolutely, on his particular machine, things did look darker and more washed out, but it was an older monitor. And then comes the question, what's the breakdown, when we're looking across the spectrum of people viewing things online? How many people have high-end monitors versus how many people have lower-end monitors, and the contrast is terrible, and the exposure is terrible, and you feel like you're looking at something much darker, and then you pop it on another screen and you're like, oh my God. So one of the other things that I always do when I go meet with my clients is I do copy a lot of my images onto the iPhone, so that then I can show it to them on the iPhone screen and go, wow, my iPhone's a lot brighter. Let me break out my iPad real quick. Oh, that's looking good too. That way, the realtor who thought that it was too dark on his screen asked me if we didn't know how to do that. And I was like, we absolutely know how to do that. It's just, we're already getting to the point where we're going to start blowing things out soon. And let's look on some other monitors other than the 8-year-old one that you have on your laptop. Well, all right, everybody, I hope this was an informative one for you, and that we went through some interesting images to give you some ideas. And so in the end, for this one, I did use the overexposed, overly poppy one, because usually overly poppy does catch people's attention. So there you go. All right, if you enjoyed today's presentation and you're not a regular subscriber here, go down below in the show notes. Please subscribe and like. You're also welcome to leave comments and questions. We do get back to all of them. I've got a backlog of a couple from this weekend and last week, so I'll be answering you guys today. And I've got one more Zoom meeting this afternoon with a client, so we'll be doing some more on-screen time with them and crossing our fingers that the monitors that they're looking on are okay and decent enough quality. We'll see you again next week. By the way, on Sunday, we'll be doing another Zoom meeting for our patrons. And before we go away, let's just go right ahead on down here. There we go. And let's minimize that again. There's the OBS screen. But so there are the links to my AZ Drone Teachable site. And also, if you're interested in becoming a patron and supporting this channel, we do so appreciate it. And twice a month, we are now doing private Zoom calls with the folks who are on the Patreon channel. So we get a little extra stuff in before the Monday live streams. And Bruce, you're welcome. I'm glad to have had all of you here again. And we'll see you next Monday again. And for the patrons, we'll see you on Sunday. So I've already got the topic lined up, and you'll see that poking up on the Patreon channel later this week. All right, everyone, have a great one. Now I get to weed through and figure out where to stop the stream first. There we go. End the stream there. Have a great week, everybody.